So fairy tales. You've probably heard all of them, or at least most of them, and you've probably grown up with most of them being shoved down your throat, especially if you're like me, a girl who grew up with Disney. I have had Disney princesses in my face since I was a kid. In today's video, I'm going to look at my favorite fairy tale, amongst at least the princess fairy tales, and that one is Cinderella. Now, from a summarizer's point of view, Cinderella is woefully simplistic. It is a story about a girl who is in a bad situation, who is rescued by a handsome prince who she falls in love with at first sight. Yeah, okay, simplistic. And I know I was a simplistic kid, but that's not enough for me looking back now to say that it was one of my favorites. So, for this video, I did a little bit of extra digging, and that's where I came across one curious little story called Rodolphus. Now, this is a story you may have known, but you may never have realized its connection. Rodolphus is largely believed to be the first version of Cinderella and actually originated in the 1st century BC. Potentially it's also loosely based on a real person, but history is a little bit funny at that. Now, it was written by Herodotus and adapted by Greek historian Strabo, and went on to appear in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, and then showed up again in the 1800s in various fairy tales. However, unlike the stepmother storyline that we all know and that we're all familiar with thanks to Disney's popularity in shooting that particular version up, Rodolphus is the story of a young Greek girl who's been kidnapped by pirates and sold into Egyptian slavery. And while her master is kind, the fellow slaves are not. So she befriends animals before finding herself in fancy shoes in the pharaoh's court, who she ends up with, but instead of a fairy godmother and a time limit and everything else, this is due to a decree from the gods. So the story has the key elements of Cinderella, and it has the iconic shoes. But in this version, Rodolphus really isn't a story about a girl who falls in love. It's a story about a girl who overcomes oppression, who overcomes hardship. And that's a lot different from what seems to be the general interpretation of modern-day Cinderella, which is a damsel in distress being rescued by a prince. As it progressed, as with most things, humans tend to romanticize things. And so, over time, we added in a bit of magic, a bit of romance, a bit more romance, and then a lot more romance, and then a lot more abuse, until we have the story that we know and love today. The Disney version of Cinderella that most of us have probably grown up with actually took inspiration from the works of Charles Perrault, a French poet and author who pretty much coined the term fairy tale and wrote the book Histoire ou conte de temps passé Cinderella, or Stories or Tales from the Past Cinderella, the story of a young girl who loses her mother at a young age, and her father is a busy man, typically a merchant or a high-ranking noble with a lot of money. So what he decides to do, and what he thinks is the best course of action, is to remarry and to bring another person into their lives. This person also has daughters of her own. Now, the father probably meant well and probably wanted to bring someone into their lives who would have experience in raising a daughter, which he may not have. So, I'll cut him some slack there. However, I cannot forgive the fact that pretty much straight after this, the father either dies in some versions, or he just plain up disappears and is too busy to ever pay attention to whatever happens in his house. This paves the way for the stepmother and Cinderella's stepsisters to abuse that situation to the fullest. So they turn Cinderella into a live-in maid. She does all the cooking and the cleaning. She is completely isolated from outside society. She doesn't even seem to go out, since her only interaction with animate things seem to be her animal friends, who, usually by the will of her fairy godmother, in some versions it's never explained how, but for whatever reason these animals can talk. And then cue the talking mice. Cinderella spends her life talking to mice. That tells you a little bit about what her mental state was like and how much abuse she was going through, and also how she was feeling. So yeah, she is not just a cut and dry damsel in distress. Cinderella does have depth to her. She is a girl that is being abused. And she's also a girl who, despite all of her abuse that she goes through, she maintains a polite, happy, maybe not always happy, but at least calm demeanor, and she keeps that innate kindness, which I think, as a little girl who watched this character, I appreciate it, because to me, it emphasized the importance of still being kind and polite and nice and approachable and just a good person, even when situations are horrid and people aren't treating you right. It's a lesson I've carried on through my life, and I have to say, it has never really led me astray. Moving on, back to the summary of the story. So, Cinderella is an abused girl and she grows up being abused, but she retains that kindness. Cue the woefully named Prince Charming's either coming of age or debut party or whatever it is, he's having a ball. And at that ball, his parents have invited every single eligible female in the land, and Cinderella made it onto the list. So she got an invite to go to a ball. Now, she is a girl of either high birth or of, wealthy status, so this sort of thing should have been more commonplace in her life. But it wasn't. So getting that invite to Cinderella meant she was super excited to go. And then the evil stepsisters and stepmother just making that whole situation nearly impossible by ripping apart her dress in some versions. In other versions of the story, they make her do long and menial chores so that she will not have enough time to get ready for the ball. But whatever it is that they're making her do, she can't attend the ball the way she wants to. And that is the one time that we see Cinderella break, because she was genuinely looking forward to this. Now, Cinderella breaks down, and this cues the appearance of her fairy godmother, because we're going to throw in a bit of magic in there. Because talking animals is not enough. Right. Cinderella is in tears and has almost given up on the hope of going to this party and, attending this ball. Then her fairy godmother comes in, bibbidi-bobbidi boo. You've got a magic pumpkin carriage, you've got mice now as henchmen, and the mice turn into horses. The dog turns into the carriage driver. Oof, I remember this. And then Cinderella goes off to the ball and she has an amazing time. However, magic doesn't last. And so, at 12 o'clock, she turns back to normal. And so, thinking of that, she runs away. Before the clock strikes midnight on the 12th chime, she runs away, but in her hurry, she drops her shoe. And in true fairy tale fashion, this has to be the world's most impractical shoe, a glass slipper. So, she runs away. Glass slipper is lying on the floor, unbroken, because it's very strong glass. The prince picks it up and decides, because he totally hasn't spent this entire evening with this girl, staring at her face and talking to her, he is going to marry the girl who fits the slipper, not the girl who resembles the one he talked to. So he decides to go on a hunt for the female that fits the slipper. Here's the issue here, though. Yeah, it's one shoe, okay? And there has to be more than one girl in that whole kingdom who has size 4.5 feet. There has to be. But no, it's a magic slipper, so it's only ever going to fit Cinderella. I never got that part of the story, even as a kid. But there you have it. So he goes, and the last house on his list is the house of Cinderella, where he first offers the shoe to her stepsisters, where the shoe doesn't fit. Now, if you've seen the most commonly accepted origin of the story, and you've read or heard of the Grimm's version, you know that at this point of the story is when things get really dark. It's the point where appendages get chopped down, and shoes get a little bloody, and a lot of stuff happens there. But in the more child-friendly Disney version, we have the shoe, they try it on, it doesn't fit the stepsisters, and then, now this varies from version to version, but in some versions Cinderella gets let out by her animal friends. In other versions, she is called out by the prince's entourage who realize there should be another lady in that house. So she gets called out. The stepmother then decides that if her daughters can't have the prince, no one can have the prince. So she gets in the way of the shoe reaching Cinderella, and because it's glass, the shoe now decides it's going to shatter in the most inappropriate moment ever. Shoe breaks. But then Cinderella pulls out the other shoe. It's a great thing shoes come in pairs. So she pulls it out, and then she tries on the shoe. And there you have it, perfect fit, because it's magic. So she and the prince now recognize each other, and then the prince whisks her away in his carriage. She meets the royal family, they fall even more madly in love, and then they get married and live happily ever after. There you have it, Cinderella biasly summarized. Now there are numerous versions of Cinderella out there, but I think what all of them have in common is that Cinderella is a young girl who is almost always stripped of power in some form or another typically by the use of a wicked stepmother, and then the only way for her to escape that situation is to get married to a royal. The only purpose this royal ever seems to serve in the stories is to make her try on a pair of shoes. If you're like me and that version really doesn't cut it for you, I'm gonna leave a few other adaptations of the Cinderella story which you can check out, and I would highly, highly, highly recommend that you check out the Cinderella story anime Japanese adaptation one, because that has some really amazing character development, and if you can look past the old style animation, it is an amazing story and just something fun to sit through. So I'll leave the poster up and check it out if you want to.